Good morning, you guys. I am super excited for today's call. I'll wait just a minute as we are getting everybody on. Here we go. All right. Good morning. Good morning. If you know anybody who needs today's call, please message them right now and remind them to get on to the Unstuck. I'd absolutely recommend that you get out a pen and paper, that you take notes, because you will feel your own transformation within today's experience. So again, I'm going to give you a minute to remind all your friends, because I know this is something it's kind of been blowing up on our team pages in the community, and we want to make sure that everybody gets here live if possible. We are recording it, but we know that you get the best kind of interaction when you can ask questions, go through the exercises yourself, and we can hold each other accountable to doing so. So, all right, let me go to my chat section here. There we go. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our guest for today's call. If I have not met you guys yet, my name is Denise Walsh. And today, once a month we ask another expert to come on in and share their best tips and tricks with us. And so I had our latest podcast interview with Alena Conley in the group, so you guys could listen to that as a kind of a prerequisite to this Zoom. If you didn't, no big deal, but go back and listen to that too, because it was that interview that made me say, we want more of what you have to offer. So I'm just going to let Alena jump right in and get started with us. Welcome, Alena, to our call today.
Hi, everybody. I am honored to be able to hop in here, and I just want to reassure you that you are a part of an amazing community. I think it was probably about 6 years ago that I started following this phenomenal coach here myself. We didn't know each other. I kind of just discovered her on YouTube, and she was very, very impactful in some of the early years of my success, and that was even from a distance. And so, I love the fact that so many of us can share knowledge virtually, because, from the comfort of our own home, we can do the work to actually not only develop ourselves, but to build businesses and to impact people around us. And so I know that many of you all were able to listen to the latest episode of Dreamcast, where I was able to hop on there. But in case you did not, I just want to quickly introduce myself. So I am Alena Conley. I live here in Atlanta, Georgia, with my husband and my 3 kids. I always think that I have to share the ages of my kids. They are 4, 2, and 10 months. And so you can imagine how crazy my household is. But you can also, if you have kids, or if you've seen people try to deal with little ones, you know that can be a huge shift and a point of transition for someone. And, having kids and transitioning into motherhood, as well as transitioning out of corporate into entrepreneurship, were 2 very, very impactful times in my life that oftentimes made me feel a little overwhelmed. And so over the last several years, I started developing a series of tools for myself. But then I started using the tools with other people to actually help me be more effective with coaching them and helping them to be more successful in their business. So a little bit about my background. I always tell people that one of my fondest memories from childhood is that at the age of 9, I actually started a book club called NIA, which means purpose. And so every Sunday, me and my girls would go to the library and we would read books all about personal development. We were reading Stephen Covey books at 9 and 10. I think my favorite childhood book was Chicken Noodle Soup for Children. And so it is no surprise that now, as a 35-year-old, I work in the space of personal development. It has but it wasn't until probably the last 8 months that I started to really do some self-work that helped me to rediscover all of those things that had actually existed since I was a kid. And so, when I started doing the work on myself, I was really able to pinpoint certain things throughout my life that were really clues to who I'm supposed to be showing up as, how I can be aligned, which if you were on the episode, you heard me talk a little bit about that. And, there were several occurrences where I should have known, like, Alena, like, this is your lane. But a lot of times what we end up doing is we end up chasing things that are maybe, more money driven, things that, are more convenient, things that we think that we want to do, or maybe even things that we genuinely had a passion for at a certain point in time, but we evolved and we never realized that during that change of heart or during our life experiences, they actually altered the things that we care about the most, which then ends up having us in a place where every single day we wake up with some form of tension. For most of us, we find that in our gut. For others, we find it in our shoulders. For many of us, it shows up in the form of migraines, anxiety, depression. But when that happens, it's really our body simply giving us cues or even clues per se as to something being misaligned. And so one of the things that I started doing with my friends, my family, but more recently with my clients is developing a practice called getting unstuck. And this is because this was the term that a lot of people would use when they would come to me with these misalignments, is they would say, I just feel stuck. It's like, I know that there's more, I've seen people to my left and my right go towards their passions or walk in the directions of their dreams, but something about how I'm showing up in my everyday life just does not feel right. And I feel like I can't get out of I can't get from where I am to where I'm trying to go. And so I developed a very, very simple tool that is very much in line with how we function as humans, how our brain works, what scripture says in terms of how we were created to perform. And it creates some exercises and some habits that people can actually use regularly anytime they start to feel this way. And so today we are actually going to go through that guide together. And so I don't know how many of you all had the opportunity to actually download that freebie that I think Denise linked in the show notes before. But if you don't, you can really just use your note paper, and I'm going to share my screen and kind of walk you through some things. And so my goal with this isn't necessarily for, in this 20 to 30 minutes for you to get unstuck and feel like, oh, life is better. But more than anything, I want to create awareness for you guys so that you can then take this tool and expound upon it, do the work, and be able to pinpoint the areas that you're probably feeling most stress or anxiety. Really they're easy solutions if we can just get control of them and identify where they lay in terms of priority in our life. So let me go ahead and get that started. And for those of you all that did get a chance to tune into the episode or maybe have already done this guide, I would love for you to pop your questions into the chat so that I can make sure that I'm answering them along the way, and even potentially using you as an example, because I always love when I can attend events and I'm like raising my hand like, well, while you're on the subject, can you tell me what you would do if you were me? And it's like always my opportunity to get like some free therapy when I'm at like free events. So feel free to do that as well. And as you can see, I am a super casual person. The way that I like to approach these things is we're all human, and what I have found with most of my clients is that we really are all going through the same thing. And whether we're in the same season currently, or if some of us have just come out of it, or some of us getting ready to go into it, many of us are just trying to get into a state of well-being, as science would define it, which is where we're finding some type of pleasantries or happiness in areas of our life, such as positive emotions, engagement. Are we engaging in things that, are aligned with our strengths? Do we find meaning? Do we find things that allow us to connect to things bigger than us? find some type of achievement? Are we being successful? Are we getting feedback that things are working? You know, are we in a place where we can work in like a healthy space? Are we eating right? Are we moving regularly? You know, and are we building relationships? Are we functioning from a space where we are connecting with others because we know how valuable that is for our success? So ultimately, we're all trying to find that happy medium across those things. And when we do that, we find our strengths in that and we find our peace. And so life is about a journey to get in towards that. And for me, these type of tools have really helped me kind of stay on track. All right. So if you have the guide, you know, this is just kind of a quick note. My company is called The Reminder Remedy. We are basically a platform and a community that's full of resources for personal development. But this is just a very simple guide for helping people get unstuck. And my tagline is everything you need is everything you got. And this is just to remind us that we are well equipped. I went through a season where I felt like I needed every single book on the market. I guarantee you anything Denise said she used, I probably went and bought it. I was that girl, you know, and then it was like, I would get to the end of the book and I'm like, oh, every book is saying the same thing. Go within, listen, follow direction in terms of what your body is telling you. Take the time to hear your thoughts. And so this guide is really to help us amplify the things that we probably already know, but we just don't know how to actually build them out. And so this is just like some anecdotes about the times that I was stuck. Because, you know, I have to let you know that I like relate to what you're going through. And because I do. And so that's what's in there. And so this is just an encouragement to unplug. So I do encourage you, once you dig further into this episode, to just kind of block off 60 minutes, maybe even put on your timer to kind of get into this. All right. So the first step of this is called the 3-column mind dump. And this is where I really like to just get clear and kind of make space for what I'm feeling. What I like about this activity is that it allows you to be very vulnerable with yourself. You know, it's just you. Nobody is judging you. And I purposely put some, you know, taboo examples in here just because that is how I want you to think about, you know, the things that come to your mind. So in this exercise, it's not about calculated responses. It's more about the things that come right away. Okay, so the first column is like what I hate about my life. Now, I have heard from clients that when they read that, their first inclination is to be like, oh, I don't hate anything about my life. Jesus is love and I love my life and I don't want to complain. I am gracious. But the way that I want you to look at this column is less about the tone of it, because that is just really my dramatic way of talking, like, oh, I hate this about my life. And it's really just you connecting with what are the things that you find yourself complaining about regularly. Like, you know, if your husband was to do an audit on like the 3 phrases that you say every 2 days, what would they be? You know, so for me, you know, I'm always complaining about my boobs. And excuse me if we have men on here that, you know, are like, oh, I don't want to hear that. But you know how it is after you have your mom every day. As soon as I get in the mirror, the first thing I do is I'm pulling them up like, oh, what would they look like if they were up here? Right. And so that's something that was a pain point for me. Sometimes I'm in a season where I hate my diet and I'm always like, oh, like I'm so sluggish, or I don't have time. I don't feel like dieting. I really want to just eat this. You know, I was always complaining about not getting sleep. Obviously, with the ton of kids, it just felt like I was constantly tired. Like I couldn't catch a break. I couldn't keep up with myself. And so in this column, you really just want to go through, like, what are the things that you complain the most about, you know, or like, is it your commute to work? You know, is it your boss? Is it, you know, the fact that you haven't been on a vacation in years? You know, be very honest with yourself. And I don't want you to feel like you can't be honest and that somebody's going to judge you, because nobody is there. Okay. So I guarantee you that when you start writing all of this stuff out, like in the beginning, you're going to feel like a little tension and a little guilt. And then you're just going to start going ham, right? You're just going to start really getting into like, oh, these are the things that, like, if I could, you know, get rid of them or delegate them or fix them or whatever, like, sign me up today. So after you do that, and we're not gonna, designate time for you to do all of that. I just kind of want to walk you through some examples, and you can maybe start writing some down if you want to. You should physically feel lighter. Like you should really feel like you have made a little more space for you to go inward, which is always the goal. What I love about this exercise is that it parallels to scripture and when it says capture idle thoughts. Because when we have all of these random thoughts, good or bad, and they have no home, they are actually deteriorating the function of our brain, which then ends up impacting our mood, how we perform, how we show up, our productivity. And so that's why journaling is so effective. That's why doing dumps like this regularly are effective, because you're able to kind of give all of those random thoughts a home. Okay, so then the second column is where we say, okay, we've gotten all of that stuff out of the way. Now we're going to write what we love about our life. All right. So I love the fact that I can work from anywhere. Obviously, I love my family. I really love the fact that I have some creative DNA in me. My dad is an artist. I just have a knack for marketing. So I really love that about myself. I love the fact that I don't take life too seriously. I love when I'm with my friends. I love traveling and seeing new places. I love creating content. I am an aspiring YouTuber at heart. I have no YouTube videos, but I have a ton of content in my head that, I would love to create or actually just edit because I have the videos. So like, these are the things that like I love doing and that I love about my life and about myself. While for some people it's like, okay, like this list is limited, for many of us, we'll find that as we dig deeper and take the time, there is so much that we really do appreciate about ourselves as individuals and the life that we live. So then this last column is, if I had this in my life would be perfect, okay? And this is that thing that we always kind of use as like a story or maybe even an excuse, but genuinely it may be something that actually could improve our wellness or our business. And so, this is where you would think about, okay, as I'm transitioning to this area of my life or trying to enhance this area of my life, if I had these things, it would really benefit me. So in the past, I really felt like an office space with full-time staff and an assistant would just like, oh, that would be great. Like I wouldn't have to edit my own shows. I could really get away from the house and have my own space that's just full of beautiful colors and walls that have like my beautiful logo. If I had that, I would show up fully dressed and ready to work every day, no excuses. Right? Like that is how I feel. And, if I had a photographer, my Instagram feed would be beautiful. My pictures would get so much engagement and my business would blow up. If I had an 800 credit score, if anybody has an 800 credit score, it feels like life is just so much better. I can go and get that Amex that I've been dreaming of. That's like a real thing. Like I really want this one particular Amex, probably not even to spend it, just to know that my credit score got where I wanted it to be. But I could get really low interest rates and do more investment properties. I could, always get the lowest note on vehicles, blah, 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 right? So, these are things that you constantly think about, like, man, if I could just get to this place, I know that my life would like turn around. Okay, so I'm going to pause right there before we go to the next section and see what's going on in the chat. All right, let's see. How do we get this workbook? Okay, so if you go to my site, alenaconley.com, and go to the very bottom, like the footer, there's a section called courses, and you can click on that and it will take you directly to this section. All right. There's also a section on my homepage where it says download the Getting Unstuck freebie, and you can put in your information there, or Denise can just send you the PDF. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yep, we'll be in the groups. This is awesome. Recording. Oh, perfect. There we go. All right. So it was mainly just about the workbook. So we're all on the same page. All right. So let's keep going. All right, so part B is all about, we've now completely let loose by doing our 3-column dump. We're feeling a little lighter on our feet. And now we want to really get through into some solutions, right? So it's kind of like, all right, sometimes we identify these things and, it's almost like, I feel like sometimes I go to therapy and I get things out and I feel like, oh, okay, like that was healthy. And then I'm always looking at her like, so like what happens now? And she's just looking at me like, that's not my job to figure out. So my clients always tell me, Alena, it just feels like you fill in the gap between like my therapist and me, because like I feel so empowered to like do certain things and make better choices when I leave therapy, but I like do not have the solution, or I'm not like working through that. And so I try to encourage people in this section to really think through what those steps are going to look like and how can we start to get unstuck with the data that we've just collected about ourselves. Okay. So the first exercise then in section B is, how can I do less of what I actually hate about my life? Okay. And so, if there is anybody offended by the stuff that I'm talking about right here, my bad, because, normally I don't have to like do this in front of people, and I could just let y'all interpret it how you want to in the comfort of your home. So, say we're taking the examples of like, oh, like my boobs are so saggy, the solution to that is simple. All right. Number one, you could just go in and schedule a breast, and this is supposed to be lift, a breast lift consultation, determine if the price and the recovery seem worth it to you. Now, for some people, it's like, oh, well, that may not necessarily be a solution. All right, well, maybe the solution, if that is something that you're considering, you break it down even further and you say, okay, well, this is something that I want for myself. In the next 2 years, I would love to get a lift. I would love to treat myself to that. I've gone in, I found my doctor, and, it's going to cost me $5,600. And this is how much I'm going to have to save each month. I might have to drive extra Uber. I may have to do, some meal prep for some neighbors, but I'm now working backwards on a solution for that. Or you may take a simpler approach and say, I'm just going to start and like call some friends or some colleagues who've done that, get their feedback. In the process of me doing that, I may realize that, it's more health concerns than I actually want to take on. Maybe once the postpartum has passed, you actually are like, oh, they were only like that because I was still nursing and now they're fine and I'm okay. The point of this exercise is for you to just be okay with identifying how you feel about certain things and then allowing your solutions to help you take action on those things so you can come to a resolution that's going to take your anxiety from being upsetting or being a point of caution for you to actually being empowered by a solution. So in this section, I really encourage people to do, 5 layers of like, well, what does that look like? In my other company, we call that doing the 5 whys. And it's kind of saying, okay, well, why do I feel this way? And why can't I do this? Why can't I show up that way? Or even in this, taking it 5 layers deep on like what would actually need to happen. I need to set up some conversations. I need to meet with some people. I need to figure out if from an investment standpoint, this is what I want to do. You will be amazed at, as you start working through the solutions without attaching the emotion, because you've gotten rid of the emotion in part A, how easy you realize this is actually like a fix. And then it allows you to take that space that was in your mind and crowding and the thing that you felt like was such a big issue for you, and you're now placing it outside of your space. And it gives you more time to focus on the things that actually matter for you, okay? So in this section, the goal is, if you know that there are certain things in your life that you truly just do not like, how can you do less of that? Alignment is about getting towards almost like this center point, right? So we have like these outliers. So just imagine like a middle line, that's alignment. And then you have these outliers, and the more solutions that you create to get to where you want to be, then you end up in the middle, right? So it doesn't always happen in a day, but what you may experience is that as you start putting together plans and solutions for each of them, you can then figure out what the priorities are, all right? But the goal is to not have a life full of stuff that you hate. Your goal is to identify what are the things that you hate and how can you get rid of them? How can you delegate them? How can you automate them? But if you don't acknowledge them, they're just taking up space and causing, being a source of, being stuck, okay? So I've included several pages on this because many of you may have very long lists and you need to be able to work through the solutions of each of those, all right? So then the next section is then how can I do more of what I love about my life? So we've identified these certain things that we love about ourselves and our life. And so then we create solutions around that help us to actually thrive in those spaces more. I also like to call these our oxy drivers. I have a brand new course called The Cheat Codes, which I'll tell you about a little bit later, but I talk about in this course, and I kind of mentioned on the podcast too, what are the things that make me feel alive? What are the things that send my oxytocin through the roof, my love drug through the roof, that give me chills when I think about how awesome that was? Was it that vacation? Was it going to brunch with my girls? Was it walking in the park with my kids? Like, what were the things that were my oxy drivers? And how can I do those things more regularly and allow them to show up constantly so I feel like this space where the love is like over here and is not anywhere close to my alignment, the more I can recognize the things that make me happy, I can infuse them more throughout my week, throughout my day, and then my alignment is starting to come together more. So in my example, I just share how, I love being able to work from anywhere. And so what are some ways that I can do more of that? I can identify new cool spots to work throughout the city and have meetings. I can try new places once a week or every other week. I can even treat myself once a quarter to half a day of a work getaway at a swanky hotel, a beach, a cabin, somewhere where I can get creative and work without distractions and be full of inspiration. Even as I read this, y'all, I feel like my oxy is like, oh yes, I forgot I need to do that. So that's why it's so important to constantly check in, because I had actually got into a place where I was finding all of these really cool like coffee shops around Atlanta, but I also would tie it to my productivity, which is another kind of brain hack. It's like, okay, Alena, you can't go to coffee shops every day because then you're gonna have to buy coffee, you're gonna end up buying food, you're gonna end up, spending more money than you need to just from working from your home office. But if you get these top 3 priorities done throughout the week, you can treat yourself by going to that new coffee shop. Or you can treat yourself to a lunch with a colleague, for networking purposes. And that would actually be something that got me super excited to show up every day, because I knew throughout the week I was going to be experiencing things that actually make me thrive. Now, something that I haven't done that I'm still very excited about, because I've done this in the past, but I want to do this more, but obviously just had a baby 10 months ago. Just had a baby. Feels like just had a baby. But I want to start treating myself to actually getting away when I do my batching days. And so batching, I'm sure you all are familiar, is when you produce a lot of content in one day so that you can automate it and plan it more so that you can live your life. And so one of the things that I want to start doing for myself is treating myself to, an environment that's really going to help me think better. So maybe, I drive down to Savannah and get around the beach, or, just detox for a little bit and then get to work. But like, those are the things that, maybe once every 3 months I can do more of. And it doesn't have to be every day for it to create a lasting impression on my life and my work. And so it's important that we don't let 5-10 years go by knowing that our work environments are what help us thrive and show up, but we never acknowledge that and we never let that show up in our life. Okay. And so same thing, you want to use this as an opportunity to list off all of those things and start putting together actionable solutions for how you can start working more in that direction of doing that more. All right. So then in that third column, we talked about, what are some things that if my life, I had this, my life would be perfect. Now we acknowledge that life will never be perfect per se, but we can work towards attaining these sought after goals. So in this is really all about kind of planning out, what this looks like. And I know that many of you all probably already do this with Denise's journals and her tools. And so you're probably way more familiar with this practice. But just for the sake of exercise, I mentioned, an office space with full-time staff and an assistant. Okay. Well, what does that look like? Because if that's something that I'm obsessing over and I've been thinking about for years and I've been using it as an excuse to why things aren't great in my business, maybe I can even just start infusing and tricking my brain into me working in that direction, so I actually bring it to fruition on a subconscious level by taking action on that. So I give the example here of, maybe I start out by reaching out to a company and go view some office spaces. This is something that I used to do when I had my, my home on my dream board. If, I wasn't at the place where I was ready to buy at all yet, but it was nothing wrong with me scheduling appointments to go and check out the neighborhoods. Sometimes I would just go at like drop off times and pick up times in that particular neighborhood and see, what would it feel like if I was having to do carpool in this neighborhood at this point in time? What do the neighbors look like? Sometimes I would even go shopping in the neighborhood. Like, what does this neighborhood Publix look like? I don't know if y'all have Publix where you live, but it's like, do they have the best produce over here? And it's like those things of infusing ourselves into that is what ends up creating the life around us. It also is what ends up taking something that we think is a challenge or lack thereof and turning it into things that subconsciously we already have, and we're just waiting for our reality to catch up. So then another example is identify best options for my budget right now. And if it doesn't make sense, then put together a 6 to 12-month plan to attain space. So an example was, when I was transitioning between homes, I really needed an office space so that I could focus and build out my business. So my budget, fit for a co-working space. That's not a private office. That doesn't come with staff and computers, but it did fit me for that season to do what I needed to do. But then, as I think longer term, what it would look like to have an office where, my 2 team members could come and we could collaborate and all of that kind of stuff. I can start working through that because I've done the commercial real estate visits. I know, what I want, how much it costs. And now it's not giving me anxiety trying to guess, exactly what that would be like. So I've identified, so then I want to maybe write out, what the job responsibilities are for an employee that I would want to hire. A lot of times we'll say, I need to hire somebody. And then it takes us 5 years to do that. When really that was like a 30-second post on Instagram that says, I'm hiring, this is what I'm hiring for, So it's like little things like that as soon as we write them down, we realize like, this is not going to take that much. Or I know somebody that could probably do this for me really quickly. And we can literally scratch that off our list of like concerns. So I just kind of listed out, how deep sometimes you can get on these things with the goal of you almost coming to meet your space head on. All right. So I have more of a space right there for that in this guide. And I hope that you guys are seeing some value in this. All right. So let me just take a second to see if there were any questions that popped up.
The biggest question is where they can get the guide. So,
okay.
And it's at the Teachable course. Is that right?
Yep. Yep. As soon as they get into the Teachable course, it'll be like a PDF download, but I can also send you this PDF and you guys can just post it directly in the group if that's easier.
Yeah, that'd be great. Then I can make sure everybody gets it easily. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then lastly, this is all about priorities. And this is actually something that I talk about in my new course, Cheat Codes as well, which is really about identifying priorities for your season. So, sometimes when we do these exercises, we start dreaming and we start getting excited about the possibility, and our list may look a little long, right? And then we get stuck back in that cycle of overwhelm. Oh, well, I've identified these areas that I want to improve upon, these areas that I want to do more in, but it's like 15 things on here, and like I know I can't get all of them done, so I'll get nothing done. Well, this is really for you to think about, if you had to pick the top 3 for right now. So for a lot of people that are being coached by me, you know, our deadline is like, if you had to pick one thing to get through the end of 2019, what would it be? You know, if you're like in the middle of a quarter, like if this was January, you'll say, if you had to pick 3 things, you know, to get through first quarter, or if you had to pick 3 things to focus on for the whole year of 2020, what would those things be? It's also important to take to look and see, you know, what makes sense for your season, because sometimes we want to pick the things that are fun or the things that seem really cool. I was having this conversation with my sorority sister the other day, and she was like, well, like I want to get back to like building my side hustle, you know, and I want to do all these things. Like, I feel like my husband is really excelling in his career, and like, I'm ready to get back to that too. And I said, okay, that's exciting. But if you do this right now in this season with your 9-month-old and your 2-year-old and your full-time job, even though you really do want to get back to the business, do you feel like this is the perfect season for that, ideally? Like, do you feel like adding on this extra source of accountability is going to be healthy for you in this season? Is that more of the priority? And I encourage her not to answer that, because what we often do is we answer those type of questions from a place of like, what is the right answer, you know? But really, we should be trying to do the work to figure out, well, what is important to me right now? And I had one of my girlfriends tell me, you know what, Alena, like, I have quality timed myself out from these kids. She said, for the last 9 years, I have been mommy, and I am ready to get back in the marketplace. And no, I don't think that that's going to make my life easier. No, I don't think it's going to come with less overwhelm, but I am willing to take on additional stress in this season, because this season has to be about me. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to show up for these kids any longer. And to me, that was a very vulnerable answer, and it was a very transparent answer, because she was able to look within and see, you know, this is the season that for me to be able to show up for my kids, I have to be able to have something that I can call my own, because these last 9 years I haven't, and I've sucked it up because I knew that I wanted to lean in further to motherhood and my kids and my home life. But now this is what I need. On the other hand, you know, my girlfriend came back and she said, you know what? When I really thought about it, I can't imagine, you know, my kid in his first year not getting all of me. I can't imagine being with him, but having to think about, did I process that order? Did I pack that order? Did I put up my Instagram post for the day? Because we have to realize that when we take on other things, even though we may be working from home or working from our phone, we are not present as present as we could be, especially on a subconscious level. Like, there's been times where I literally be nursing my baby, half sleep, but in my mind, I'm not thinking about nursing him. I'm thinking about this email funnel that I need to run tomorrow, right? But had I not been, you know, in a season where I had to juggle so many things, I could have actually been probably emitting more positive energy into him. I probably would have had the extra energy to read another book, you know, sing a song, something, you know what I mean? And so this is not for me to determine. This is for you to decide that in this season, what's the priority for you. I'll give a personal example for me, is that when I was going to choosing my top 3 things, you know, for the last 6 months, or really I'll say from the beginning of the year, you know, there were several things on my plate, but what I realized I yearned for the most was finally a season where I could focus on my kids. You know, Denise knows that we both come from, you know, direct sales, and I did that for 6 years. With my first kid, he was on my hip at every event, you know, and it was like, while he tagged onto my life, I never got to be a part of his life. You know, it was just kind of like, he was just there. And I'm just like, figure it out, son, like, learn how to, you know, sell these products with me, basically. And at night, it kept me up at night, because, you know, he special needs. There was so much more that I knew I could be doing. But more than anything, I wanted to understand him better. I wanted to know him as a person. I wanted to understand his personality better. There were things that my nanny were able to tell me about my kids that I didn't know, because I wasn't around them enough, because I worked so much. And granted, you know, sometimes there are seasons of sacrifice, but at my core, I knew that I needed a season where I could really just be about them. And so for 8 months of 2018 and 2019, I like just didn't work. Like, I don't even know how I still got this roof over my head, because I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm just throwing in the flag, you know, because I just can't do it all. Like, in this season, in order for me to be who I want to be, I have chosen this. And I have the faith that everything else will fall in line, because I feel like I'm trying to get aligned with who I'm evolving into, which is a mother, you know? And so it's okay for us to, you know, nix certain things and be okay with, like, the seasons will still be there. And I know that as women and moms, sometimes we think that life is just going to pass us by and we'll never be able to catch up. And this may be a poor example, but I tell people all the time, like, look at Kris Jenner, okay? Kris Jenner was literally like a stay-at-home mom for like 18, 20 years, okay? Just being a mom, being a socialite, whatever, okay? Yes, her husband was famous and she had, like, you know, whatever kind of medium money, right? But then it was like, as soon as those kids were grown, she took off. She became the ultimate businesswoman. She used all those 18 years of tea parties and socializing and going to Palm Beach and that network to build an entire brand around her family. And now she is at the peak of her career in her 60s, you know, and it's built off of the season where she actually went in and focused on what that priority was. And so some people don't like that example, because I know Kardashians can always be controversial, but there are tons of examples of people who don't really pop until they're in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s. And then there's some that pop in their 20s and 30s, and they're like, where did they go? Oh, they went to go live their life in their 40s and 50s. So it's like, ultimately, we all kind of have these similar journeys. We just have to decide based on what we want to do, when the timing is, what feels right. And by constantly checking in with what our soul is trying to tell us, making sure that we are really aligned and kind of showing up in that space that makes the most sense. Okay. So then lastly, you know, I always like to just kind of write summaries of what I've done. And most people are always like, yeah, I didn't do that. I didn't feel like doing that. But to me, it just helps me put into perspective what I said and what I'm going to do. You know, so this is just an example of kind of based off the examples that I gave in the guide, what I put as like my almost like my top 3 summary solutions, so I can kind of walk away feeling really good about, you know, what I put together, feel light on my feet, and feel very much aligned with like what's next for me. So that is the Getting Unstuck guide. That is what I use regularly, in addition to other tools. But this is probably the one that I drive the conversation with people, because some people really still can't figure this part out, you know, and I do individual sessions where we work through, like, you know, like some people don't know, well, what do I do with these things that I figured out? And that's when it's important for you to bring in those relationships so that you can talk through it with people, even if you don't hire a coach to talk through it. Sometimes you just need that outside perspective of people to really help you make sense of things. So Denise, I would love to open it up for questions or anything that you feel like could add value to this experience.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you so much for going through this with us. I know I have a page of notes, and I recommend to everybody to spend some time really answering these questions for yourself if you weren't able to do it while we were chatting here, because this getting quiet, right, and allowing those things to bubble up will bring us clarity. And half of the time we're so overwhelmed, we're so busy, we're multitasking, we're thinking about a million things that we're not creating the space for this. So what Alena has created for us is the platform to create our own space. So take advantage of that. You can go to the link in her e-course to find it, but I'll also post it in the groups afterwards. So you can print this off and use this as a guide. So as we do have a couple questions that came in the chat. And then if you have some questions, post them in the chat now. But Jamila said, so how do you incorporate your third column, like your perfect day, your perfect life column, into your everyday life? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, when it comes to the perfect day, it really is about just identifying what that looks like, because the space that's being taken up in our head typically is from no action occurring, right? So like, as you start first identifying these things, right? Because so many of us will say, well, you know, we don't recognize that there are the same things that we repeat over and over again. Like, I think that for the longest, I used to always say, my Instagram page needs to be prettier. You need to take better pictures. Like, this is what I be saying to my husband. And, you know, he would say, well, that's an easy fix, you know, but it would still literally drive me crazy because I had not come up with the plan on how I was going to plan my content or who was going to take my photos or whatever, right? So the point is, like, first kind of identifying like what that is and then working through like, how do we get to that point? So then that's when you can kind of break down like that goal setting. So it's like, all right, if I know that, you know, I want to show up with more consistent content, how can I make sure that I'm doing this in a way that is actually manageable? So, you know, when it comes to social, it's all about planning. So, you know, maybe I need to go and download a content calendar. Maybe I need to take a class on like, you know, angles and editing for pictures. And then after I've done that, at that point, maybe I do decide that I want to book a shoot every month to just have automated content. So it's kind of like taking those pieces and then putting dates around them. And so some things won't necessarily have to show up every single day, but they need to show up in like your plan of action for the month or the week so that you can make sure that you're kind of working towards those goals.
Yeah, it sounds like, you know, you're really deciding what it is you want, and then you're reverse engineering it and doing a little bit every day. So that way, eventually you'll be there. And one thing that I've learned with building businesses and really designing your dream life is that it takes intentionality. Nobody's Instagram feed is going to 100,000 plus on its own, right? It's all on intention, it's decision, it's focus, and then it's putting it in the calendar so things start to move. Now, one thing that you said, especially on the podcast, was about listening to our body. And I know that our body often tells us things that we might not know what it means. So as we're settling in and writing these down, what are some things you've learned about listening to our physical cues?
Yeah, so I mean, it's literally the number one thing created for the purposes of us being in tune with self. And unfortunately, the way that life is set up is that many of us are hustling and bustling through the day, and we just can't feel it, or we ignore it, or we get used to it. And it's not until somebody teaches us like, oh, like this is what this probably means, that we try to be more in tune. So something that for me has been very positive, powerful in my transformation is I started to notice that the older I got, the more kids I got, the more anxious I was. And I felt like it was because I'm basically managing like 5 humans at once, right? Because you know you got to manage the husband, and then you got all the kids, then you got yourself, right? So for me, that was causing a little source of anxiety because it's like, okay, this person has this schedule, this person has this issue, this person has this personality, and I have to manage how I talk to them. But the way I talk to them doesn't work for how I talk to this person. So anyways, I noticed that my anxiety was starting to increase the more kids I had, but it wasn't just in my personal life. It was actually showing up in work as well. And so I started paying attention to the fact that, you know, whenever I would start feeling my heart race, I would then step back and say, okay, what's causing this? What is causing my heart to race? And all of us know when we're starting to get anxious, but we don't put a pin there to say, I want to figure out what's causing that. Now, what I will say is that you do not have to face anxiety and overwhelm and things like that in that moment. But the exercise that I have always learned is to put a pin in it and make time for it so that you can address it. Or if you have the time right then, you think through it. So, you know, I work from home. So a lot of times I do try to do the work right there. So an example that I can just think of recently is, you know, I was on a call and I realized that, you know, before I got on the call, I was anxious. During the call, I was anxious. I'm pacing. So when I got home, I was like, okay, I feel much better. And I realized that my anxiety was coming from the unknown of like what my CEO wanted. You know, she had been traveling for the last 2 months. You know, I was kind of feeling like I didn't really know what I should be working on or like what our priorities were. And so in my mind, I'm thinking that she's thinking Alena's doing a terrible job. She's not putting out the content that I want. And so when when I realized that the unknown of not knowing like what she's thinking kind of drives me crazy, I started putting in place more meetings for me to check in with her. I started putting out more emails for her to know what's going on with me so she could give me feedback. So that was just like a healthy opportunity for me to not get sick, because anxiety will literally turn into stress, which basically kills us, right? So it's like every day I don't want to be stressed wondering if I'm performing at work. Let me put in these measures so that I can have touch points more regularly so I don't have to guess. But my body is what told me that I was actually dealing with regular anxiety around the unknown at work. And that happens in many areas. So I would say listening to your gut, obviously, when the palms start sweating, when the heartbeat starts racing, when you can't sleep at night, when you see a certain person and you want to go the other way. On my new course, I have a section, I have a module called Surviving Social Media, and it's all about doing self-discovery from social media. Like, there's so much you can learn about yourself based on how you react to social media. And so in those exercises, I'll say, if you come across a post and you immediately just like go, what is it telling you about yourself? What is your body, like, what is your brain trying to tell you that either you don't like that person, something that person is doing is making you feel insecure about yourself? Are you envying that person? Are you happy for that person? Did you think that was funny? So there's like so many emotions that if we just stop and say, well, why did I do that? Like, why did I feel that way? Or why do I feel the need to block this person? Or why don't I want to give her likes today? Like, those are the things that you can be doing. Instead of questioning what everybody else is doing every day, start just spending a day questioning why you do things. Is like the best exercise that you could do for your health.
I love that. It really is about self-discovery, going inward and saying, why is it that I feel this way? Why am I responding this way? Why is my heart racing? And then because you know these skills, you can do something about it. I think often we feel that way, but because we're not quite sure why, we're not quite sure what to do about it, or even if we do know why, we feel powerless to take action in an area. And so you set up those measures so you could get more feedback, so you could feel less anxious. So smart.
Yep. I always say, like, take a page out of these corporations' books. Like, what they do to like build businesses, we just need to do in our personal lives. Like, they track data and they have metrics and checkpoints. But it's like, are the companies more important than us? No, we need to do more work and measurements and checkpoints on ourselves. So it's like everything that I do in a business, I do on myself. And, the results can be measured to some degree.
Ooh, I love it. Everyone's saying, so helpful. Thanks for sharing. Great training. So one question is, what kind of exercises do you use to work on these clues? So is the question about how to recognize the clues, or what to do once you have them? Or once you notice, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out right now. Oh my gosh, I'm sweating. Oh my gosh, I'm pacing.
Yeah,
oh my gosh, I can't sleep at night.
When it comes to tools, like, I am the tools queen, and I know I keep talking about this course, but it just came out today, so it's still top of my mind. But that's what I talk about. Is like, these are like some of my top 5 tools that I use, and it's really just all about, like, you can even make up your own tools. Like, honestly, that's what I did. Is I started looking, like, I used to read books like, Strength Finder, or, I would do like Myers-Briggs personality tests at work, or I would do like Enneagram tests. And, I told you on the podcast, like, I'm obsessed with Enneagrams right now. But what I love about a lot of the experts in Enneagrams is that they teach you stretch zones. So it'll say, okay, this is your personality, and this is what you tend to do. This is what you should pay attention to. If you want to grow through these traits that may not be your strongest, these are the exercises that you can do. So an example of that is, I'm an Enneagram number 7. I'm an enthusiast. So one of the things that we typically tend to do is, we're always searching for the next adventure. So when things start to get complicated or get too hard or get too stressful, the first thing that we tend to do is like try to go on a vacation, say, oh, I'm gonna leave work early today and just go and have a cocktail. Like, we always want to escape from reality. And I know this about myself. I just did this weekend. It was like, I told you I was stressed about work. And I told my husband, I should just quit this job. He was like, here you go. You're always trying to escape from your problems. And so when you can recognize that, you start saying, okay, well, why do I want to escape? And someone that likes to work through issues, and that's why it's important when you look at personality tests, don't just look at your results. Look at the strengths of other numbers, and that's what the Enneagram encourages you to do. It says, in this stretch zone, you could benefit from taking on more traits of a 3. Right. And 3s are consistent. They follow through. They show up, and maybe you have coffee with someone like that. In our previous business, I used to do that all the time with you Reds. I would say, hey, like, how do you just sit down and do work all day? Like, where is the party? And so my team thrived because I was a blue and I like to have fun, and I brought the human element, but one of my leaders was a red. So she always made sure we got the business done. So that goes back to connectivity. One of my girlfriends, when I was freaking out about my new course, I said, but what if I just don't know everything they need? And she said, the moment that you don't know something that they need, then you call somebody that does. You bring in an expert, and you then become the knowledge broker. And she said, because we can never have everything. We can never have all the tools. So as long as we're doing the self-work to identify the stuff, if we need help, we can then reach to our left and our right, and then people and relationships can become our tools as well.
Awesome. Well, you guys, thank Alena in the comments. I will then post the Get Stuck On guide in the groups so we can have that, so you can spend time to really plan for these next few months. We're running into 2020, and what we do now impacts what we do next year. And I love the idea of reverse engineering what it is you really want, getting it on your calendar, and then taking action every single day. So thank you so much, my friend. It was great to learn from you again, and we'll see you guys next month.
Bye guys. Thank you, Denise.